Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. Okay, time for a little Middlekauff mailbag. Very, very easy to get involved. You just go into my DMs on Instagram. It's my name, 2 Fs, and ask a question. Any question. Get your question answered here on the show. For the bag, Howard and others have said this, so obviously it is known. But quarterback success is often a product of the roster, coaching, culture, etc. Sometimes I think we call quarterbacks busts without ever getting to see them in a winning environment. Anyways, who are some quarterbacks that have truly been busts? And or what percentage of busts are truly, quote unquote, busts? It's a good question, because I think some guys clearly are overdrafted, right? Let's use Marcus Mariota. He was drafted number 2 overall and is just not a starting quarterback. But when the dust settles, you're going to look and Marcus Mariota is going to have a 14-year NFL career. So by no means was he a failure, but relative to his draft status, he did not live up to it. So to me, like Marcus Mariota, there's a difference of a guy that plays for a long time. Like, he's not a bust. He just was overdrafted. Jamarcus Russell literally didn't try. Didn't study, didn't care, didn't give a shit. So, like, Mariota tries. He's just not good enough. Jamarcus Russell, Johnny Manziel, if you watch his documentary, which honestly I thought was kind of cringe. I really do. Kind of bragging about screwing around, which I get it. I mean, it's what he did, but it's like, I even saw Edelman and some of those guys were like offended by it, which I don't blame anyone in the NFL, because the work ethic that it takes to sustain your spot and what you are given as a high pick is the chances you get over the non-high picks. Like, you're a bust when you don't give a shit, when you don't try. Now, think about this quarterback class right now, or, you know, the guys that are all moving on. Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Mac Jones. You can't make statements on young players who their career's not done. Are they going to be busts? I don't know. Are they out of the league in a year? Because if they are, then that's a disaster. But right now, all those guys clearly were overdrafted, right? Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Fields, and Mac Jones, Kenny Pickett. But you have to see the totality of the operation. Now, any guy that's Ryan Leaf, I mean, he's even told you, right? Just didn't have the maturity, work ethic, and the injuries. To me, you got to be washed out of the league to be a bust. I think we overuse that term sometimes. Mayock talked about it with Cleveland Farrell, who he drafted number 4 overall. And I put him and Solomon Thomas under the same umbrella. Both those guys are going to play in the NFL for 10 years. They were not failures because teams continue to want them to play. Hell, the 49ers were like massive injury when Farrell got hurt. Now you look back, should have been a second. If he's a 3rd round pick, it's like, you got a 10-year player as a 3rd round pick. That's a great selection. But when you draft a guy in the top 10 or top 5, the expectation that comes along with it happens immediately. So I hear you. I think that kind of word, just in general, is probably used too liberally, is used too often, right? To be a bust, you have to just want no part of football, and you're out of the league quick. I'm excited about the NFL keeping the Christmas Day schedule. They mentioned there would need to be a couple games on Saturday so teams have enough rest. In my opinion, they should choose the AFC division winners from the same conference last year to play on both Saturday and then again on Wednesday. Chiefs, Bills, Ravens, Texans all have stud quarterbacks. It would be fantastic. What are your thoughts on scheduling? You know, what's funny is we had a bunch of people over on Thanksgiving, or not Thanksgiving, Easter. And, you know, booze was flowing. Honestly, it was kind of struggling. I'm not a big Sunday drinker because I like doing work on Monday, but I was hurting yesterday. But I battled through. And booze was flowing, and we were talking about like how are they going to do that? And I started thinking, I wonder if they take the the Thursday game from the previous week, and both those two teams play on Wednesday against different opponents, and then maybe a team coming off a bye week because no one's going Sunday to Wednesday. So I do think it's going to be pretty complicated, and I wonder if they're working through that right now. Now, you could argue if it's a team off a Sunday bye into Wednesday, that's an advantage of a team Thursday to Wednesday, but I think it's going to be a little complicated. So cross my mind too. Love the show. 3 and Out. Listen to every episode. This is from Henry. I'm an artist living in New York, 26 years old. And the only thing I'm passionate about is as art is football. Been a lifelong Commanders fan. Once the Redskins. I knew that. First game I've ever watched was the last time they won a playoff game. I'm thinking about trying to find my way into a career in sports media or maybe another role in the NFL. I've got a good college degree. I'm a strong writer, and I have a creative skill set I've developed through my artwork. Was wondering if you had any advice for someone in my position, things to do, jobs to look at. I know it's a competitive field to break into, but I think when you just ask like a general question like that, you kind of got to narrow it down. Like you want to work in football. Well, do you want to try to be like a scout? Do you want to try to be a PR guy? Do you want to try to be like a sales guy? I think you kind of got to pick a lane to get your foot in the door. And once you pick a lane, the easiest place to probably get your foot in the door would be something sales wise, but you're creative, right? So if you're creative, maybe it makes more sense to try to get into the production side of an NFL team. All these teams now have big operations behind the scenes, whether it's YouTube, whether it's the website, whether it's the doing everything surrounding about the in-house media team. Now, I don't know what your background is, even in art, but I would try to do something that way would be my best advice. But I think the hard part is when you're really general, it's like casting a huge net into the ocean. It doesn't really work that way because they're going to ask, well, what do you want to do? Right. So like, what are you doing when we hire you? I guess would be my question. Huge fan of the pod. 2 questions. As a Rams fan, hopefully that answered your question. What position did the Rams draft for their first round pick? Which is kind of crazy. They haven't had one in like a decade. I play in a pick'em league every NFL season for $20, and this year I won, taking home $200. Being a small wager from the beginning, I rolled it over to the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl and turned it into $400. Look at you. I haven't cashed it out yet. I was wondering which Final Four team I would put it on to win the national title. UConn has been dominant, and Edie for Purdue may be the biggest mismatch in college hoops. But should I take a chance on Alabama 13-1 or NC State 20-1? I wouldn't touch either one of those. To me, the value for betting on the Final Four simply would be Purdue. You're getting them basically 2.5-1. And I know NC State is one of the crazier stretches we've ever seen. I mean, they were about to not make the tournament. Then they win the ACC tournament, and they just rattled off 4 straight wins. I'm pretty confident Purdue's going to beat them. And then you just get in this one-game situation. Can Purdue beat UConn? Alabama's been an awesome story. Hard to see them beating UConn. It really is. But, I mean, that dude Nelson they got from North Dakota State. Sears, the point guard, he looks like a little Jalen Brunson or something. But I think if you were going to take one of the non-UConn teams, because UConn right now is like minus 250, so you'd bet 400 to win, I think like $150. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing this because I think UConn is going to have to fuck up to not win the national championship, but it would take Purdue to win it. That's if I was going to bet on one of the 3 underdogs, it would be them. Because basically you just look at it like they're going to beat NC State. They're a big favorite. Can they just, I don't want to say shock the world because they're a 1 seed too, but could they, what are they going to be? 5-6 point underdog in that game? Depending on how both teams look, assuming UConn and Purdue win. Maybe a 7 point underdog. Could they just win that game? That's what I would do. I would say the Rams. Um, I mean, I would say a defensive lineman. You would think that they're going to be in the mix for one of the defensive tackles with Donald retiring. Little bit of a sleeper. What if Penix is there? That to me would be the sleeper. But I would say defensive lineman. Question for the pod. Watching your podcast with Mayock was awesome. He's one of the people who's really increased my overall interest in football and the draft. So thank you for having him on. Same impact as well. The conversation had me wondering about your career as a scout. If you can talk about it, what was your biggest success in your career as far as player you may have pounded the table for before the draft while at Fresno that turned out to be a great player? I'm trying to think. That's so long ago now. The recruiting process when I got there, Derek Carr was already committed. We had the recruiting classes we had some pretty good classes, but also had some whiffs. The thing is at Fresno State, Robbie Rouse, I mean, Coach Hill loved him too. He went on to be the all-time leading rusher until Ronnie Rivers, who's now with the Rams, broke his record. I'd be lying if I said like they were picking the players. Again, these guys in college, it really was more about your college coaches going out, and then you would just watch and kind of confirm if that's who you're going to offer or not with the head coach. It wasn't as much like the NFL where you were like, hey, we should draft this guy in the 4th round. It was less of that when I was at Fresno State. And Coach Hill just kind of ran the recruiting process. He was the GM / like team president, essentially. Here's a good one. You and Colin are clowns. Appreciate the note. The thrill and excitement of March Mania is here. And DraftKings Sportsbook, one of America's top-rated sportsbook apps, is giving new customers a shot to turn $5 into $150 instantly in bonus bets with any college basketball bet. North Carolina listeners, don't forget DraftKings Sportsbook is now live in your state. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code JOHN, J-O-H-N. New customers can bet $5 to get $150 instantly in bonus bets only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN. The crown is yours. How did the prime rib turn out in the smoker? What do you think of the Reddick trade in return? What do you think the disconnect was? I did for Easter, I bought a prime rib from the Scottsdale Meat Market, which is elite. I mean, that the options you have, if you're ever in Arizona, if you live in Arizona and you're going to barbecue, Scottsdale Meat Market, this is unpaid ad, fantastic. My brother's been doing this for years, is smoking the prime rib. So I'm like, I'll do that. And I got an 11-pounder, bone in, and smoked that bad boy on the Traeger for about 3 hours. I probably could have left it on there for another 20 minutes. I think the hard part with prime rib, and I don't pretend to be some meat master here, and I'm a relatively newbie to the smoker. I've had the Traeger since Thanksgiving. Is with a prime rib, and maybe it's like this with some other meats too, is it's supposed to cook once you take it off the smoker another 7 to 10 degrees. Once you take it off and put it on your cutting board and you kind of wrap it in tin foil. And it's a really hard thing to gauge because different parts of the meat, I would say, are more cooked than others. The one thing with prime rib is like it actually tastes pretty good, closer to rare and medium rare, but it kind of scares you as someone that does steaks. Like you have a pretty good idea what medium rare, medium, I don't really eat my steaks rare, but you can eat prime rib rare. And I think it tastes pretty good. So one thing about prime rib, if you get a big one, I got 11-pounder, shit was expensive. It was like $350, but it was fantastic. And I don't want to toot my own horn because the smoker did most of the work. And the guy at the meat market gave me the dry rub. I said, what's the best dry rub you have for this prime rib? He's like, well, I got this bad boy right here. He's like, cut a couple cloves of garlic, put it in a bowl, mix it all together, put it on. My brother said, add a couple sticks of butter to the top. Highly recommend smoking a prime rib. And I would say the Reddick trade, I talked about on the podcast. I just think it's simple value with the Eagles. They weren't going to extend him. He's older. It's not that they don't think he's a good player. They need Nolan Smith to kind of come on, and the Jets are just in win now mode, so they don't really have a choice. I know this is very random, but I was hoping you might be able to do me a favor. I listen religiously to your podcast. About 6 months ago, Colin and Nick were on together discussing ideas for the NFL. Nick brought up an international week. I thought it was very interesting. I ended up making a presentation on the idea, and it circulated it as a networking tool to a bunch of folks in the league. Anyways, I ended up getting a job out of it, working in corporate strategy at the league office. Dream job. I don't know if you have a relationship to Nick, but I would love to send him the presentation, thank him if ever possible. Thanks a million. You have really inspired me to go all in. That's cool. Little league employee. I'll see what I can do there. Would an international week, so you're saying like every team in the league play internationally on a given week? That's interesting. I didn't hear his theory, but clearly the league is very, very active internationally. Maybe he was onto something, and maybe you are too. Now Raj is hearing your idea, so that's fucking cool. I'm a diehard Colts fan and grew up on Peyton Manning and then Andrew Luck into high school and college. As such, Colts fans got used to a lot of winning over the course of a 20-year period, and I think we have high standards for the club. Ballard has been the GM of the Colts since 17. Since then, he's never won the division. Embarrassing. We've won one playoff game and only made the playoffs twice. He values the draft very highly, and he's reluctant to use free agency to fill holes in the roster. He also has a tendency to double down on guys he's drafted that can't perform. He's made the comment before that he'd rather go young with the roster than pay A+ money to B players in free agency. Before we dive deeper on him, I don't necessarily disagree with that. Despite all these facets, I constantly hear he's a great GM and talent evaluator. I'm wondering what metrics people around the league use to judge other GMs. Well, I think he's well-liked. So I think people like him a lot. And I think there's a balance, right? Because clearly they invest a lot in their own players. Now, you could say, well, you're not exactly investing into like fucking Trent Williams and Micah Parsons. Like, who on your team do you have to have? Like Quentin Nelson? Like, on your team right now, who is a non-negotiable, we got to have this guy? When you close your eyes, think about the Colts, like, how many are there? So you could push back, like, why we keep doubling down on the guys we drafted, but it's not like we're drafting Ray Lewis and Derek Thomas and Barry Sanders. Jonathan Taylor, okay, really good pick. We invested in him, keep him. Quentin Nelson, really good pick, invested in him, keep him. Like Michael Pittman, really good player. But like, is he make or breaking you? And again, I understand signing him, but like that's kind of the core of the team. And is that good enough to compete in the AFC? And the answer is clearly no. And I agree with the overall sentiment that you just overpay, right, in free agency. Not really debatable. But it's like the housing market right now. If you live in a nicer area that's popular, you're going to have to pay more than you want for a house. Welcome to life. Like, do you want to live there or not? Because if you don't, then move. And eventually in free agency, you got to fill some holes. So yeah, you got to overpay a little bit, but pay a guy or two. It's not that crazy. Then just be bottom feeding. So I think it is fair to wonder why they're never active at all. And like you said, if you're of a certain age and you grew up the Peyton Manning teams, hell, even the Luck teams, you were used to starting the season to go, we can compete with anybody. Whether that turned out to be the case at the end of the year or not, like you thought you had a chance. I think it's fair to say these last 5 years, it's not been the case. Now, the trump card with this team moving forward is going to be the quarterback and the coach. It looks like you have a Shanahan, a McVay, a LaFleur, like a pretty special play caller. So if that's the case, you're in good shape. But then it's on him to mold the quarterback to be a really good player, / it's on the quarterback to figure out ways to stay healthy. So you have this big, like, kind of variable that can change your franchise. If he becomes a top 10 guy, you're going to be good. If he cannot stay healthy or has struggles, you're going to be in trouble. And then everyone's going to get fired, probably except the coach. Been a fan of the pod for a year now. I'm pumped when I get the notification for a new episode. If you could play golf with any three people, who would it be and which course would you play? You know, this question gets asked a lot, right? If you could play golf with anybody, if you could have dinner with anybody, I think it's a tough question because, like, there would be people that you would want to have dinner with or play golf with that aren't quote unquote in the sporting world. Like, it'd be kind of cool to, I don't know, spend 5 hours with Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos. I mean, there'd be certain individuals that, if you like certain things in life, that are bigger than sports. But if we just kept it to sports, I mean, it would be hard to not want to spend 4 hours on a golf course with Tiger Woods. So if I was just keeping it to sports, I'd probably go Tiger, Brady, Michael. I'd keep it pretty simple. But if we were opening it up to anybody, it probably wouldn't be any athlete or coach or anything under that umbrella. I want to revisit the take you had on January 4th, saying Penix is the clear number 2 in the 24 draft. I said that after the Texas game. I was excited. He just made me $8,000. So we got to take it somewhat with a grain of salt. Best game of his career. But, you know, sometimes I get excited after a performance. I know he didn't play great in the national championship game, but I really don't understand why he moved off this take. I'm a Commanders fan, and I really don't see it with Daniels or May. It's frustrating to me that Penix and Nix, two guys who put out so much great tape, aren't even being considered as potentially the number 2 guy. As you once put it, we overthink this one. I moved off the take a little bit because in the national championship game, he played an NFL team. And that NFL team had a shitload of NFL defensive linemen. And they hit him, and they hit him, and they hit him. And it phased them. And when you play the Eagles, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Huff, Sweat, Nolan Smith, these guys are lined up over you, and they're going to hit you. The Giants, I don't know how good they're going to be. Offense has a lot of questions. Their defensive line is rolling out some dudes. The Cowboys have Micah Parsons. So 6 games a year, you are facing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of NFL defensive line talent. And I just watched that guy get peppered, and it really phases game. Now, obviously getting hit as a quarterback phases Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. But it was like he could barely get up. And it was like that in the Oregon game. I've never disputed, and Mayock talked about it, just on individual throws, he throws as good as anyone not named Caleb Williams, if not better. But you watch the physicality of it. If you took him at 2, you're not going to, I wouldn't act like you were crazy. But he is 24 years old. The injury stuff, I think it's fair to go, that'd be very, very bold. No one disputes in the clean pocket throwing the ball. It's as beautiful as it gets. NFL or college. The deep ball, it's unreal. But you do have to factor in, like, getting hit. I mean, your team's not going to be as good right away. So I didn't necessarily, I hadn't really thought that. I watched that game. I was excited. The more and more information, I don't agree with people acting like he's a second-round pick. Like, I would take the guy if the Raiders or Broncos or whoever takes him in 13. I do understand, though, comparing him to other guys that are 20, 21 years old, more physical upside, more durability, guys that don't have durability question marks. I get it. In a vacuum, kid's a fucking baller. I think he's on a different level than Bo Nix. But it just gets back to, it's hard for that visual to get out of my mind because they hit him. And it's why I like Bryce Young. When he played Georgia 2 years, when they played him back-to-back, right? They played him in the SEC championship game, and then he played him in the national championship game, and Georgia beat him. He beat Georgia once, and then Georgia beat him when Mechie and what's his name? Not Jonah Williams, but the hell's the first? My brain's not working. The dude on the Lions, who they both tore their ACLs, one in the Georgia game and the other in the semifinal game. And then Bryce had nobody relative to those two guys. And he was just getting peppered. He just kept getting up. And you're like, God, this guy's unfazed. And Penix a couple times looked like he couldn't really get up. it made me nervous. I don't question his toughness or anything. I do just question like when the durability stuff's in the back of your mind. But I hear you. Like if you took Michael Penix at number 2 overall, it would be whoa. Now I saw today the gambling lines. Jaden Daniels for a while was the favorite. Now it's flipped. Drake May technically is the betting favorite. It's still relatively close, but it's pretty clear it's going to be one of those two guys. And most people I know think it's going to be Drake May. But if you just throw on the tape of Drake May versus Michael Penix, like one guy is better than others in 2023. During the season, 2023, Michael Penix, better player than Drake May. But part of drafting is the future. If we just went off like, you're never going to be any good, Josh Allen would have sucked. But that's not the way football works. You keep improving. Chiefs fan here. While we have been very blessed recently, Kelsey is most likely retiring in the next couple years, and we don't have a replacement option as of now. Do you think they should draft the tight end in the first 3 rounds so he can learn and develop under Kelsey? Also, do you think the player voted grades where overall the Chiefs were bottom 5 in the league impact the team going forward? I've said this before. I don't think they matter at all. This is not college football. I'm not recruiting you. I recruit you with my money. Now, is it kind of embarrassing for the teams? Yes. But I pay you, right? I pay you $20 million. Sorry, your seat's not a little nicer. Now, you could argue doing that is not an ideal way to run a business. And we could argue that all day long. It's probably a lot of truth in that. And I don't know all the details. Like, only the guy going to work there every day truly knows. I'm not going in any of these buildings. I can't speak to it. Obviously, the newer buildings like the Raiders or this Chargers new building, no one's going to complain. Some of these older buildings, people complain. And there's a difference of like Michael Bidwell's terrible owner. Mark Hunt's a little cheap. Like historically, he's been a little cheap. Does he need to change a little bit? Yes. Does that matter at all as long as Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes are there? Because they're chairs instead of stools or whatever the hell. So I think that stuff's pretty overrated when it comes to some of those NFLPA grades with the good teams. Ideally, if you're a team, you'd like to have, A pluses across the board, but that clearly wasn't the case for the Chiefs. One thing I've heard, beside Bowers' terrible tight end draft, so maybe the Chiefs will like someone. I just don't know if there's a tight end. They're drafting the end of the rounds. Maybe they take a guy on the second day. But, yeah, I mean, I think this Rashee Rice thing, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, I think it's pretty clear who they're going to take in the first couple rounds. I'd be shocked if they don't take a tackle and a wide receiver. Love the pod. About the hip drop tackle. I can't bullshit about player safety as long as they use artificial turf. They could get rid of way more serious injuries by just switching to grass. I know they won't because the poor billionaire owners would complain, but the hip drop tackle almost seems like a scapegoat. I totally understand. Hate hypocrites. Listen every day. What are your thoughts on the new hybrid kickoff? I think it's weird going away from the original kickoff we've grown up on and watched our whole lives, but I don't think I hate it. Gives better chances for returns and less boring touchbacks and bullshit fair catches. Totally agree. I do understand a couple teams voted against it. I know the Niners were one of them, and they were asked why they voted against it, and simply because it's like a pretty dramatic change. But the NFL is not really afraid of change, and it's not that complicated. I just think we want more action, and that play had become irrelevant. That play for a long period of time, I don't care whether you played Pee Wee football through the NFL. If you had a dynamic kickoff return guy, you had to be on your toes because that guy could take it, let alone to the house, but like 30, 40 yards and get to the 50-yard line. Now, I just think we're going to see so much creativity. I think it's going to be interesting to put like cool, exciting players back there. What if you're the Niners and you throw Christian McCaffrey there? What if you're the Eagles and you throw Saquon Barkley back there? Right? What if you're Tampa Bay and you throw the white guy back there? What if you just throw guys back there and you might not do it all the time, but like tie game, second half in a big divisional game. Like, why wouldn't you want Deebo Samuel back there? Or, a player like that. I think you're going to see more and more of that, which never would have happened before, ever. But now you go, what? That's like one of his touches. He's not taking a huge collision. And I think it gives the opportunity for good special teams coaches to really show creativity. It's going to be a shit show early on. I'm still a little confused by the rules. I guess I need to reread them. I guess it's, from the 20 to the goal line, you have to return it. And if it goes in past the goal line, it comes out to the 35. And if it goes out of bounds, it goes to the 30, or excuse me, the 40. I got to reread back on the rules, but clearly teams are going to try to kick it between the 20 and the goal line and then tackle the guy, within the 15-yard line. So there are going to be some guys that kick it out of bounds, trying to get too tricky on the little kick. I also think this impacts, because touchbacks now aren't great. Again, I forget the exact yard line. I don't have it off the top of my head. Like the 49ers drafted Moody in the 3rd round because he had a powerful leg. So a lot of these kickers that just kicked it out of the end zone, that attribute is not as important. Not that that was the end-all, be-all to begin with, but that changed a little bit. Was listening to the Joel Klatt show, and he brought up Penix to the Dolphins. Wondering what your take is on that. Well, the only way you would draft Penix, if you're the Dolphins, is if you're not going to extend Tua. If they extend Tua in the next month or plan on doing it after the draft, you're not taking Michael Penix. Maybe they're waiting to see if they can draft Michael Penix. I would say if the Dolphins drafted Michael Penix, would tell you everything you need to know what they think of Michael Tua, of Tua Tagovailoa. So I think that would be a little stunning, but I also think paying him $200 million is insanity. But, who am I? Question for the mailbag. Eagles fan all my life. Think Howie does a good job, and Lurie's a good owner. But this blind spot with Sirianni is concerning. He's not a good coach, and you could see it. I think this upcoming year is a disaster waiting to happen. They lose 2 or 3 games in a row in the beginning of the year, and this city will be pitchforks out. But another problem is if they win and the offense is awesome, Kellen is now looked at as a head coaching candidate. And we are stuck with Nick and looking for a new OC, or do we fire Nick and make Kellen the head coach? See disaster even if we win. Let's face it. If the Eagles had a do-over, and this is impossible to do because you were winning, and I don't blame them for not doing it, but there's not a team in the league that would take Sirianni over Shane Steichen. Just based on when we've seen a year of Shane Steichen compete with Gardner Minshew, but he's an elite play caller. Sirianni is a motivator who, as we saw this year, didn't look like a great motivator. Now, people within the Eagles like the guy, but from a schematic standpoint, I just don't know what he's bringing to the table. I struggle with an offensive coach who's a CEO. I can live, because we've seen it historically work a lot. Defensive guys, CEO level guys. Tomlin, Harbaugh's a special team / DB guy. Parcells forever was a CEO, defensive guy. I just think as an offensive guy, like, why can't you call the plays? And I know we saw him for a little bit with Jalen's second year, and it was a disaster. But like 3 years later, you just have no ability to do it. Kellen Moore's making a lot of money. The Eagles paid him a lot of money. I do think that they dramatically upgraded at the position, or the assistant, the 2 coordinators in Vic and Kellen. But I hear you. It's hard to shake what happened last year, and it falls on Nick's feet. It's one thing, like McCarthy is a good example. That game was embarrassing. It was bad. But like, they had played pretty well up into the playoff game. It's why that game was so shocking, and they got their ass kicked. But say this about Mike McCarthy, who takes a lot of shit. I've seen him call plays and it works. Aaron Rodgers, Dak Prescott, like, people can make fun of Mike McCarthy as a head coach. No one can dispute the guy can run an offense. Nick Sirianni cannot run an offense. You'd be like, well, he's 65, he's old. No, the guy's like 43 years old. So yeah, I'd say it's pretty concerning. And I hear you. Like, if it goes well, let's say you're the number 1 seed and your offense is incredible. Well, Sirianni's not getting the credit. Kellen Moore would get the credit. And then you have a problem on your hands again. Now, let's just hypothetically say you have the best offense and Jalen's an MVP candidate. Is Kellen a lock to be an NFL head coach? I would say no, but it's higher than 50-50 because he's been viewed highly before. Had a rough year with the Chargers, though Brandon Staley gets most of the criticism. And then you, boom, resurrect yourself again. He would definitely get interviews. Anytime you're getting interviews, you can be the head coach. So I hear you. I don't think it's a blind spot. I think it's pretty well documented. They were very close to firing Nick Sirianni. And if Nick Sirianni had been fired, I don't think anyone would argue he got screwed. But, like, you invest in a guy, he just a year ago, I mean, he wasn't calling the plays. Deichen was, but he was the head coach. You were in the Super Bowl. So you're getting one more year, but he's just to go in with a guy on a hot seat. And the Cowboys are going to face this too. And a lot of other teams, like Saul is on the hot seat. That pressure, if he doesn't go right immediately, can just crumble. It's like a brush fire turns into the whole house burned down. And you're right. If it goes well, the conversation is like, well, we can't let Kellen Moore get out the door. You could argue Sirianni goes well or goes bad. Might not be the head coach in 2025 no matter what. Good call.